1, 2, is this on?
Stephanie McMahon was always going to garner real-life heat due to her last name and high-up position within WWE.
Stephanie, there's nothing worse than somebody who's dumb but thinks they're smart.
Throughout her now Hall of Fame career, the boss's daughter has rubbed numerous people the wrong way, and vice versa.
The first writer I ever had to suspend without pay, which is not even a real thing. But I had to do it because Paul was just behaving like a petulant child.
For this video, we'll be exploring such issues as we hear from the wrestlers, writers, and executives that had negative run-ins with the billion-dollar princess.
And I remember I looked at Stephanie and she looked so pissed. So we go outside and she's just like, "How dare you talk to our partners that way? I should fire you for this."
We're only going to include things that can be legitimately proven or have been spoken about by the people involved.
Stephanie's supposed to dress him down and just like bury him, right? And he really, everyone's going, God, she didn't bury him. And it's like, well, I guess that she was supposed to. It's just that, he wasn't, he kept interrupting her and stuff.
You need to listen to this.
Don't interrupt
Excuse me. You need to listen to me.
That had some serious heat with Stephanie, man, for like a couple weeks.
Today we highlight 10 wrestling personalities who had real-life heat with Stephanie McMahon.
And as soon as we go into the room, she starts attacking me. Well, I love Hunter, and I don't care what you and you, Chyna. And I was like, whoa, wait.
Vince Russo's very brief return to WWE in the summer of 2002 was met with much pushback, mainly from Stephanie, who was the director of creative writing at the time. Russo believes she and the other writers didn't want him there because it would have undermined their positions. Vince thinks there was no need for all of them there, given his writing expertise. However, Russo's initial pitches were all shot down. These included restarting the WCW invasion, having Chris Jericho as world champion, and hiring Disco Inferno. Russo then spoke with Stephanie privately following the first meeting with the creative team.
Sometime during me meeting with the creative team, there was a phone call from Stephanie McMahon in another room, and I was summoned to that office. And it was just, the phone and me, and I had a conversation with Stephanie, and I got to tell you, Joe, she was talking down to me like I was a redheaded stepchild. This girl's talking to me like she's been a booking creator for 20 years and it was my first day on the job. I was very respectful to her, Joe, but the red flag went up immediately.
Following Stephanie's intervention, Russo was offered a consultant role working from home as opposed to a senior writer's job.
So as soon as I got back to Atlanta, where I was living at the time, there was a call from Vince, and his exact words to me were, "Vince, this is not going to work out." I was not surprised by that at all.
From there, Vince joined the brand new TNA promotion instead. Russo believes Stephanie was blindsided by his hiring. He said that she would have never agreed to him returning had she been told about it by her father.
But a writer that was in that room basically, stated Stephanie McMahon had no idea that I was going to be hired. That Vince McMahon did this all without her knowledge. Then, when he basically decided to hire me, and then he told Stephanie, that's when I had the conversation with Stephanie where she literally talked down to me like I was a child.
In the years since, Russo has said that putting Stephanie in charge of creative was one of the worst decisions Vince McMahon ever made, and that decline in ratings with her at the helm speaks for itself. During the period where Russo was briefly brought back, Stephanie already had Paul Heyman to contend with on the creative team. She and Paul regularly butted heads, as Heyman fought for his ideas and presented them in ways that often ticked Stephanie off. On his podcast, JR discussed how Paul and Steph didn't get along.
I'm sure that Paul got close to the edge on how far to take the argument before he backed away, because he just was hell-bent on getting his way. He was very defiant. Not that she wasn't, but she had the right last name. He didn't.
Stephanie suspended Paul in early 2003 after he nearly came to blows with head writer Brian Gewirtz following a disagreement.
The first writer I ever had to suspend without pay, which is not even a real thing. But I had to do it because Paul was just behaving like a petulant child, and he had to argue every idea he had. He wanted every single idea he had to be the one that we went with, and that's just not the way it goes unless you're the boss. But Paul had the ability to beat an idea into the ground, to the point where no one wanted to do it, even if it was a great idea.
Heyman's time on the writing team didn't last much longer, as Steph felt he wasn't effective in the role. Paul rejoined creative in the fall of 2004, but only lasted 3 months before Stephanie got rid of him. He'd been put back on the team by Vince against her wishes.
It just was a distrustful situation. If you can't trust someone, you can't be in business with them. It just doesn't work.
Heyman had been reportedly burying the Hollywood writers Steph had hired, much of whom had limited wrestling knowledge.
He just seemed to rub everyone he was in contact with the wrong way. He can do great things, but he's just his own worst enemy.
Paul was then sent to oversee the developmental promotion, OVW. Heyman and Russo aren't the only writers that got under Stephanie's skin during her tenure as creative figurehead. For these next entries, we'll look at 2 writers she's personally fired. The first being comedian PATRICE O'Neal. The stand-up comic was hired in late 2000, but only lasted a week before he got the axe. This was around the time Stephanie had just been given the head writer's job, so PATRICE was probably the first person she fired. However, once wasn't enough. Steph couldn't control herself as she told O'Neal he was fired over and over again.
I just couldn't do it because they're very corporate. You have to be committed to their cause. And I just wasn't committed. You know what I'm saying? And I got fired. What's her name? Stephanie fired me like 6 times.
Really?
She kept calling me back and firing me, but she doesn't realize comics just get fired. So she goes, you know you're fired, right? I go, yeah, I understand. I do understand. You know what I mean? I'm not going to.
What would you get fired for?
Because I had a show.
Yeah.
And I said I can't make it. She's like, what? You're committed?
Yeah. They want 100% loyalty.
I was like,
over
I
there.
met Steve Austin. It was good enough.
By the early 2000s, writer Chris GOUGH had been with the WWF for a few years, but never had a good relationship with Stephanie. One incident saw her blow up at Chris after he was tasked with doing something for her dad.
Vince was out waiting for a limousine, and I was supposed to get the right time for him at this limousine, even though this is not my job, but Stephanie wanted me to make sure the limousine was at this time right when Vince walks out or whatever. And it was like, 30 seconds late, so that became like a huge deal, and looking back, maybe she was just looking for a reason to can my ass, I was super tight with Shane, and at the time Stephanie and Triple H were not married, they were dating, and it was sort of like Triple H would show up on these damn writer conference calls. Stephanie'd be at her house, we'd take roll call, and she'd be like, what do you guys think of this? And we'd be like, okay, what about this? And you hear in the background, well, I think, and it's like, it's Triple H is in her house telling her what to do, right?
The thing that got Chris fired happened after Stephanie told the writers to give TNN reasons as to why Raw's ratings had gone down since changing over from the USA Network.
So she's like, everyone, we're going to have a meeting tomorrow in the conference room, and it's going to be with executives from TNN, and they want to know why ratings aren't as good as they were on USA. So, everybody come with questions, and I expect you guys to talk, and if you don't, you'll be in trouble, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay.
Chris was the only writer that spoke up, and though he made valid points, Steph went nuts afterward.
I'm giving him the compliment sandwich, right? Like, you guys are great, but you don't do nearly as much as USA Network did, and no one really knows your channel as much as USA, but you guys are doing a really good job working towards that, And I just remember, I'm like, I thought I said pretty obvious stuff. And I remember I looked at Stephanie, and she looked so pissed. So we go outside, and she's just like, how dare you speak to our partners that way? And I was like, what? And I was like, you wanted us to ask us stuff, right? And she's like, how dare you talk to our partners that way? I should fire you for this. And I'm like, I'm taking it back, man. I'm like a kid. She's only a year or two older than me, but I was like, I did not want to lose this job.
The next day, Chris was relieved from his writer position, although Stephanie told the rest of the team he had quit to spend more time with his girlfriend, failing to mention the fact she fired him over speaking up in the meeting with TNN's executives. One of Stephanie's most high-profile firings was Bruce PRICHARD in 2008. Bruce held down a creative on-screen and then talent relations role for the best part of 20 years. He'd been one of Vince's right-hand men for years, but with Steph and Triple H gaining more power as time went on, PRICHARD fell down the pecking order.
Because of my relationship with Vince over the years, that I would speak to him in a way I could get away with that other people couldn't speak to him like. However, I do feel that Steph looked at that I was disrespecting not only her father but the chairman of the company. And I said, you know what, I just don't think Steph likes me very much.
Plus, he and Stephanie clashed over various topics and often had differing opinions.
With Steph, if you disagreed with her, I think sometimes she took it as being insubordinate. I just was set in my ways, an old-timer, crotchety old man that was set in my ways, and here's this young whippersnapper coming in, and she thinks she knows everything because she's the boss's daughter.
However, as Bruce, JR, and Russo have said in the past, Vince McMahon is always going to side with his daughter.
So I said, what am I supposed to do? When he asked me a question, she says, just tell him that you've got to run it by me and that you need that I need to answer that for him and come and get me.
Another divide between Bruce and Steph came due to the talent preferring to have their promos produced by Pritchard instead of her. That's because Stephanie wanted to do take after take, while Bruce preferred no more than 1 to 3 takes. This all happened during a time where the communication had completely broken down between the two, and even the chairman couldn't fix it. That's because Vince got annoyed by their issues, so he yelled at both of them. This just made Steph even more angry at Bruce.
I fell into a trap, man. I fell into a trap where one of us had to go because we were both doing the same thing. I was unhappy. I was miserable on the road.
Stephanie released Pritchard at the end of 2008. He'd brought a gun to work in his briefcase after packing up his belongings and evacuating his Texas home due to a hurricane. It's likely Steph felt it was time for Bruce to move on, given their differences, and this was the perfect reason to cut bait. Pritchard was definitely a victim of Hunter and Steph coming into power, but no one suffered more from Stephanie and Triple H's relationship than Chyna. Over the course of 2000 and 2001, when Hunter and Steph had been paired romantically on screen, Chyna and the game's real-life relationship had apparently been off and on during this time.
And there's a misconception of the way that things ended with us, but you know, it was our relationship had gone downhill. There's a period of time where we were separated, and you know, things happened in between, and then you know, you kind of partway get back together, and it really wasn't a full-blown relationship at that time. So I see things
technically you weren't cheating, you're saying?
Yeah, I don't see things the same way she does.
Always sees it that way.
Yeah, you know, so he's dating Chyna, who's a big star at that point.
Right, which supposedly they weren't dating at that point.
Okay.
They had a house together and were trying to get out of the house or whatever. It was
You bought that,
very well. I mean, I did
Why not?
for a while, and then I didn't, and then we stopped. We saw each other for a couple months, and then when it came apparent to me that well, obviously she's still living in your house, something's going on. We stopped talking for a long time.
Chyna said that a physical altercation with Hunter coincided with her finding out about his affair with Stephanie. In the summer of 2001, the Ninth Wonder of the World found a love letter in Helmsley's briefcase from Steph that was dated August 2000. Chyna had figured something was going on for a while, but this was the definitive proof.
How'd you find out he was cheating? How'd you catch him?
I found a note, actually. Yeah, I found a note.
Like a written note?
A written note.
What did it say?
From Stephanie, from date of the year, like tucked away in his briefcase.
What did the note say?
What was in the note?
Just a note from her saying, you know, how much she loved him, and the date was dated like a year beforehand, so that's how I knew.
During an interview with Vince Russo, Chyna described her first meeting with Stephanie since learning of the affair.
And as soon as we go into the room, she starts attacking me. Well, I love Hunter, and I don't care what you and you, Chyna. And I was like, whoa, wait. You know, we have a house together. We're going to get married. We have this life together. And then she's like, well, if you need my father, then I can call him. I'm like, just get your dad.
Hunter was not present at the time. In fact, he and Chyna didn't speak again until 2004. Following the confrontation with Stephanie, it was agreed that Chyna would not re-sign with WWF when her contract expired in November 2001.
I went through a lot of torture for about a good year from the time that they started their storyline together on TV.
The Ninth Wonder of the World sat out the rest of her deal, though talks had been at a standstill since the start of the year because she wanted more money. However, now given the bad blood with Hunter, Steph and Vince, there was no way Chyna would remain with the company. She ultimately never returned before passing away in 2016. On the Monty and Pharaoh show, Chyna's friend Terry Runnels described the final time they shared a locker room together before Chyna's departure in 2001.
We were in a locker room together, just she and I, and she said to me, she goes, yeah, he's been fucking Stephanie. And I told Vince I was going to fucking kill her.
Really?
Yeah. And she goes, that's why I don't have a job anymore.
Prior to her passing, Chyna was rarely mentioned or credited as being such a trailblazer for females in the company. Rather, in WWE lore, Stephanie is the one credited with kicking off the women's revolution on the main roster. However, TNA Hall of Famer GAIL Kim believes it was them that started it all back in the mid-2000s. GAIL hasn't had much good to say about Stephanie over the years. She claimed McMahon was partly responsible for her release in 2004. GAIL referred to Steph as vindictive, but didn't go into further detail. The 7-time TNA Knockouts champion said Stephanie did little to fight for the women during the infamous Divas era. The issue has been raised on platforms such as Cafe de Rene.
But in no way did I ever feel like she was fighting for us. If she right now, she's always been women empowerment since the women's revolution. So I wish she would have been more like that before. I'm not going to lie. I did wish that.
GAIL noted how the ladies had people fighting for them in the Divas era. They just weren't in executive positions. GAIL thinks if Stephanie really cared, she would have done something back then, while also saying that the reason McMahon didn't speak up was the same reason she changed her perspective years later. GAIL told the Women's Wrestling Weekly podcast that it all comes down to marketing.
WWE always thinks in a very business mindset. So for them, they're thinking, okay, this women's revolution is becoming hot. Ronda Rousey, this Me Too movement. So of course they're gonna
jump on
that bandwagon, because to be honest, I'm going to say it. I don't care, because I've said it on Twitter. Stephanie could have been fighting for us a long time ago. She was there every single time I worked there. And she had zero interest in fighting for the women back then. So for me, as they should, they're a corporation. They think in a very business way. So for them, everything is business motivated.
GAIL also credited the fans with sparking the women's revolution thanks to the Give Divas a Chance hashtag. This coincided with AJ Lee replying to Stephanie's retweet about women being given equal pay as men. McMahon was reportedly furious with the reply, but couldn't exact the punishment as that only would have created bad PR. AJ and Steph addressed the exchange and all that was behind it over 10 years later on McMahon's podcast.
It felt like an uphill battle a lot of the time, and I was one of the first people really fighting for it quite vocally. And I think when you are sort of the first to do something, you get hurt storming the gates,
Sure.
It's a little rougher, but I think it's worth it because it opens the path for people that come behind you. And so I felt like that was worth it, whatever backlash was going to be, It was a rough time.
But yeah, I mean, and there was a lot of things happening at that time.
Yeah.
So I'm sure everyone could read into it however they wanted, but it was so important.
Yeah.
It was a really important public-facing step.
Stephanie pushed back against the online chatter, stating the women's revolution wasn't an executive decision. Steph proclaimed how it was fan-driven and spurred by all the female wrestlers past and present who paved the way. AJ and Stephanie reflected on their Twitter back and forth with cooler heads a decade later. Naturally, things were much more emotionally charged back then, especially given the state of women's wrestling on the main roster.
I wasn't happy that it was directed at me because it wasn't anything I had direct control over. But I was really happy that you did, because that movement, the whole women's evolution in WWE, it didn't happen because of executives, or it didn't happen because, maybe along the way, people voicing their opinions, but it really happened because of the women.
Yeah.
But then for our audience, when they started the hashtag Give Divas a Chance at that time, that's what couldn't be ignored.
Yeah.
Before any executive stepped in to initiate change, it took the fans, social media, women in other sports, and the women's wrestlers themselves to take a stand and finally force the hand of the powers that be. AJ was one of the numerous wrestlers Stephanie verbally eviscerated on television during Steph's time in the Authority faction. This happened regularly over the next couple years, and it was rare to see someone stand up to Steph. In 2013, Dusty Rhodes was one of the few that clowned the $1 billion princess in a segment. Though this wasn't because he was scripted to do so, the American Dream went completely off script in 2 separate segments with McMahon. This was during the period where promos were recited word for word every week.
You need to listen to this. Don't interrupt Excuse me. You need to listen to me.
Stephanie's supposed to dress him down and just bury him, right? And he really, everyone's going, God, she didn't bury him. And it's like, well, I guess that she was supposed to. It's just that, he wasn't, he kept interrupting her and stuff. When he's supposed to be quiet.
Giving Dusty a script made little sense, since he's among wrestling's greatest ever talkers. Plus, the storyline was so personal, as Rhodes fought to get his sons rehired. On the September 30th, 2013 edition of Raw, Dusty infuriated Stephanie by improvising again.
Let me
During 2 Inside the Ropes live shows, Goldust and Cody Rhodes stuck up for their father, saying it was foolish to script the dream, especially given the storyline that was all about their family.
That had some serious heat with Stephanie, man, for a couple weeks. But that's him stepping out of the box, and it made it more impactful, everything that he was saying about this.
He pissed her off with that interview. But if you're going to bring him up to TV, it's kind of like we were talking about being everything, your own producer, your own. If you're going to bring somebody up who knows what they're doing, don't tell them what they're doing. They already know the story. I'm not saying you go off the rails. I'm not saying you do your own thing. If you know the story, which he literally does, he's my real father, he gets it. You don't need to script him.
Scripted promos was one of the things Scott Steiner buried WWE for after he left the company. Big Papa Pump also took aim at Stephanie and Triple H, saying they don't know how to run a wrestling company.
I don't really have a problem with Vince, but his douchebag daughter, and his, then Triple H. Yeah. What the fuck? He wouldn't be in wrestling if he wouldn't be fucking a boss's daughter. So,
That's right.
So that's the bottom line, and I've said it before, he's basically the Kevin Federline of professional wrestling. If he wouldn't be fucking who he's fucking, he wouldn't be where he's at, you know? He wouldn't be in wrestling right now, so.
Steiner believes Stephanie having so much stroke was a bad thing for wrestling, especially since her relationship with Triple H gave power to the game.
Stephanie, you know, there's nothing worse than somebody who's dumb but thinks they're smart. You know what I mean? Stephanie learned everything she's heard from people. She's never wrestled. She's never been in a ring. She don't know anything about wrestling. She don't know anything about being cool. She's never been cool.
Scott would eventually mellow out and patch things up with WWE, allowing him to enter the 2022 Hall of Fame, but there's no denying how strongly he opposed the company for many years due to his miserable time there.
It just goes to show you nobody wants to watch that bullshit WWE puts out right now. You know, that product's f***ing horrible.
How was your time there when you were at WWE?
Brutal.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, that was the 2 times I was up there, the 2 times I thought about quitting.
Really?
Wrestling. Yeah. It's f***ing weirdos, man. I mean, and the bullshit you got to put with it now. Now it's worse because, you know, you got one of the biggest cunts running it, you know? Like Stephanie McMahon. What the f*** you know about wrestling, you know? Just because, and then Triple H, you know, you kidding me?
Now, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our similar video on how Matt Riddle burned every bridge in wrestling. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.